My name is Lisa Morris, and I was born in Ohio, though I live now in a quiet neighborhood in Denver, America. My house is a small blue one with white trim and a little porch swing that creaks when the wind blows. I bought it last spring, fully paid for in cash. Most people don't know that part, and I don't tell them. The neighbors think I'm just another woman who works from home, maybe doing some typing job or a small gig. That's fine with me. I like my privacy, and I like watching people guess. When Thanksgiving rolled around, I packed a small suitcase, locked my front door, and started the long drive back to Cleveland, where my parents still live in the same old white house with a cracked driveway. It's funny. You can build a new life, make more money than you ever imagined, but the moment you step back into your childhood street, the years peel away. I was once again the daughter who was too quiet, too strange, and not practical enough. I could already hear my father's voice before I reached the door. The sky was gray when I pulled into their driveway. The house looked exactly the same. The old swing, the worn welcome mat, the sound of the TV from the living room. The porch light flickered. It had done that since I was 15. I knocked, but I didn't have to wait long. Mom, Linda, opened the door. She looked surprised to see me standing there, holding a suitcase. "Oh, Lisa," she said, with that tone of polite surprise people use when they've already decided you're an inconvenience. "You came after all." Dad, Robert, stood behind her, arms crossed, the same way he always did when he wanted to show control. My brother, Daniel, sat at the dining table, carving the turkey with his self-satisfied grin, and my cousin Sarah was laughing at something he said. The table looked perfect, a magazine picture. Glazed turkey, mashed potatoes, rolls, cranberry sauce in a fancy bowl, and a pumpkin pie that shone under the light. It was warm and bright, the kind of sight that's supposed to mean family. But it didn't feel that way to me. I walked in quietly. "Smells great," I said, trying to sound normal. "Don't just stand there," Dad said. "Sit down if you're staying." I slid into a chair at the far end of the table. Everyone kept talking, laughing about their jobs, their plans, and Daniel's new truck. No one asked how I was. I waited until they all started serving themselves before I reached for a plate. But before I could lift it, Dad's voice cut across the table. "This food isn't free, Lisa. You have to pay for it." At first, I thought I had heard wrong. I looked at him, confused. "What?" Mom laughed, the kind of laugh that stings sharp and short. "You know your father's joking," she said, though the tone wasn't really joking at all. "But seriously, you can't expect to come home and eat for free, not when you haven't been working. Times are hard." Sarah looked down. Daniel smirked, carving another slice of turkey. "Maybe you can do some dishes to pay for your meal," he added, pretending it was a joke. I just sat there, staring at the table. I wanted to say something, to tell them that I wasn't broke, that for the past year, I'd been earning $10,000 a month online, working with clients across America and Europe. I built websites for small shops in Chicago and Miami, designed ad pages for a company in Boston, and even sold design templates to a firm in London for £2,000. I worked hard, sometimes 14 hours a day, alone in that small Denver office with nothing but coffee and determination. But I didn't tell them. They wouldn't have believed me anyway. The truth was, I had built something real, my own business, my own income, my own freedom. I didn't need anyone's help. Yet here I was, being told to pay for food in my parents' house. I felt a strange calm rise inside me. I put the plate back down. "It's okay," I said softly. "Keep the plate." Dad looked up, half smirking. "Don't be dramatic." Mom shook her head. "You can't take a joke, can you?" But I didn't answer. I stood up, walked to the small hallway where my suitcase still sat, and picked it up. My brother laughed. "Where are you going? You just got here." I didn't even glance at him. I walked to the front door, opened it, and stepped into the cold. Outside, the wind was sharp, but it felt cleaner than the air inside. My car, my beautiful black coupe, waited at the curb. I bought it with my own money just 3 months ago, a quiet purchase that meant more to me than any applause could. The dealer, Chris, had asked if I wanted to finance it, and I smiled as I said, "No, I'll pay in full." He looked at me like I'd just told him a secret he couldn't understand. I loaded my bag into the trunk and sat in the driver's seat for a while, staring at the house. Through the window, I could see them laughing again, probably at me. I thought about walking back in, showing them the car papers, showing them screenshots of my income, showing them that I wasn't a failure. But what good would that do? Respect isn't earned by proving, it's earned by living. I turned the key, and the engine hummed to life. The sound filled the empty driveway. As I pulled out, I caught a glimpse of Dad at the window. His face shifted when he saw the car, a flicker of something like disbelief. Mom appeared beside him, her mouth slightly open. I didn't stop. I just kept driving. The road out of Cleveland was quiet, lined with bare trees and distant lights. I passed a diner on the corner, the kind that always smells like burnt coffee and hope. I thought about stopping for pie, but I didn't. I wasn't hungry anymore. What I felt wasn't anger, it was release. As I drove, I thought about how much had changed. A year ago, I couldn't even afford my rent. Now I paid my bills in full, saved for taxes, and still had enough left to travel when I wanted. I worked with real clients, people who valued my ideas, who paid on time. I'd built a name that meant something in small circles of digital freelancers. It was quite a success, invisible to anyone who measured worth by titles or family approval. By the time I reached the highway, snow had started to fall. The flakes hit the windshield softly, melting into streaks of silver under the streetlights. I turned on the heater and smiled, not because I was happy exactly, but because I was free. I didn't have to prove myself anymore. That Thanksgiving night, as I crossed state lines, I promised myself something. I would never again sit at a table where I had to earn the right to eat. That was the moment I stopped being the daughter they pitied and became the woman they would one day regret underestimating. And for the first time in years, I felt full. When I left my parents' house that Thanksgiving night, I drove through the quiet Ohio roads until the streetlights gave way to darkness and the highway opened wide. The radio played softly, but my thoughts were louder. Every mile between Cleveland and Denver felt like a memory, a reminder of how far I had come and how long I had walked alone to get there. My parents had no idea who I had become, no clue what I had built. To them, I was still the daughter who never had a real job, the one who always chased dreams that didn't pay. But to me, I had become something else entirely. I was self-made, invisible maybe, but solid and free. The road hummed under the tires as I thought back to Dayton, the city where it had all started. I used to work in a small office there, the kind with gray cubicles and fluorescent lights that made everyone look tired. My boss, Mark, was a man who loved buzzwords more than people. Every Monday, he'd bark things like, "We need more closers," or "Push harder," while he sipped coffee he didn't pay for. I was 26, underpaid, and overworked. My job title said marketing assistant, but what I really did was make coffee, schedule meetings, and watch other people take credit for my ideas. One afternoon, after yet another meeting where Mark talked over me, I went back to my desk and opened the blank document. I typed just one line. "I'm not doing this forever." That was the day everything started to change. I didn't quit right away. I spent 6 months preparing. Every night after work, I sat in my small apartment and taught myself everything I could about online business. I learned web design, ad writing, and how to build a simple store from scratch. I watched free tutorials, read guides, and practiced until my eyes ached. I didn't have much, an old laptop, slow internet, and cheap coffee, but I had time, and that was enough. I worked until past midnight, building fake websites just to practice. Some were terrible, but some were good. Slowly, my confidence grew. My first real project came by accident. A bakery in Seattle posted on a freelancer site, looking for someone to fix their online order form. I charged $250, terrified they'd say no. They said yes. I finished the job in a weekend, and the bakery owner, Emily, sent me an extra $50 tip. She wrote, "You saved my business this week." I printed that email and pinned it above my desk. It stayed there for a year. After that, I built a site for a gym in Atlanta, then an art shop in Chicago, then a travel agency in Boston. Word spread quietly, and soon I had more work than I could handle. I stopped applying for jobs. Clients came to me. Some paid in dollars, a few in pounds, especially the ones from Europe. I kept careful records, saved receipts, and learned about taxes from YouTube. The numbers started to rise. One month, I made $3,000, then $6,000, then $10,000. The first time I hit that mark, I sat on my bed and stared at the screen, afraid it was a mistake. But it wasn't. When I finally quit the Dayton office, Mark laughed. "Good luck freelancing," he said, like it was a punchline. "You'll come running back when the bills hit." I smiled politely, boxed up my things, and walked out. I never went back. Denver was my restart. I moved into a small blue house on a quiet street lined with maple trees. It wasn't big, but it was mine. I turned the spare room into an office. Plain white walls, a wooden desk, a corkboard with 3 notes. Be clear, be kind, be paid. I lived by those words. I treated clients with respect, worked hard, and refused to undersell myself. When people tried to haggle, I smiled and said, "I understand, but my rate is fair." It took time, but I learned to value my own work. The money didn't change me much, but it changed how I breathed. I could finally exhale. I bought my black coupe, not to show off, but to remind myself that I had done something real. When I picked it up, the dealer, Chris, looked at me like I didn't belong there. "Who's the lucky buyer?" he joked, glancing around. "I am," I said. When I handed him the check and he realized it was in full, his eyebrows shot up. "You must do well," he said. "I do okay," I answered, smiling. In truth, I did better than okay. Some months, I made $12,000, sometimes more, when I took on big clients. I worked with firms in Dallas, Portland, and even London. I started waking up early, drinking good coffee, and planning my day with quiet pride. I didn't need anyone to clap for me. I was my own applause. Still, there were moments I wanted to share it, to tell Mom and Dad everything. I imagined sitting at their table, showing them my invoices, telling them that their daughter had built something strong, all on her own. I imagined Mom smiling, Dad nodding with pride. I held on to that hope like a fragile dream. Maybe I thought if they saw the numbers, they'd finally see me. But deep down, I knew better. My parents had always measured success by what they could see, the kind of job you could point to, the kind that came with a badge or a title. Freelancer meant unemployed in their world. So I stayed quiet. I told them I was doing okay, and they took that to mean I was barely scraping by. I didn't correct them. What I didn't realize then was that my silence would one day sting me in ways I didn't expect. That Thanksgiving night, when my father said I had to pay for food, it wasn't just cruel, it was confirmation. They had already decided who I was, and it wasn't worth the cost of a plate. Driving through the snow that night, I understood something. Some people don't deserve to know your success. Some people can't handle it, especially when they once looked down on you. I didn't need their validation anymore. I had my house, my work, and my independence, things that no one had handed me. When I reached Denver 2 days later, the sun was rising over the mountains. I pulled into my driveway, turned off the car, and sat for a moment, watching the light hit my front window. Inside that small house was everything I had built: my desk, my laptop, my notes, my freedom. I thought about the laughter at the Thanksgiving table, the cruel words, and the shock on their faces when they saw the car. Then I thought about the quiet of my home, the soft hum of my heater, and the peace that came from earning every bit of my life. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to prove anything. I had become the kind of woman who worked in silence, who didn't need applause, and who was free in the most powerful way, free from the need to be understood. That night, before going to bed, I looked around my office and whispered to myself, "You did it." And for once, I truly believed it. The morning after Thanksgiving, I woke up in a small motel room just off the highway, halfway between Cleveland and Columbus. The air smelled faintly of old coffee and detergent, the kind of scent that clings to road travelers. I hadn't slept much, not because the bed was uncomfortable, but because my mind replayed the dinner scene again and again. My father's cold words, my mother's laughter, the empty plate that had become a symbol of everything they thought I wasn't. By 8 o'clock, the snow had stopped. The parking lot glistened with frost, and my car sat quietly under a thin layer of ice. I scraped the windshield, loaded my suitcase into the trunk, and started the engine. The heater hummed, spreading warmth through the cabin. I wasn't planning to go back to my parents' house, not so soon, but something tugged at me, a box I had left years ago in the guest room. Inside were old notebooks, maybe some photos, and a letter I had written to myself when I first moved to Denver. I didn't want to leave it behind forever. So I turned the car around and drove back. When I pulled up to the house, it was late morning. The sky was pale and bright, and sunlight glinted off my car's black hood. Mom opened the door before I even knocked. She stood there, blinking, like she wasn't sure what she was seeing. Her eyes went from my face to the car parked behind me. "Whose car is that?" she asked, her voice uncertain. "Mine," I said simply. For a moment, she said nothing. Then Dad appeared behind her, his mouth tightening as if the sight of the car itself offended him. Daniel wandered into the doorway too, followed by Sarah, still holding a mug of coffee. The four of them stood in a line, looking at me as if I had stepped out of someone else's life. "You're joking," Dad said finally, his tone sharp. I smiled faintly and walked past him to the driveway. "No joke." I opened the trunk and pulled out the old cardboard box I had come for. The edges were worn, taped, and retaped over the years. Inside were a few books, some framed photos, and the letter I remembered writing at 24. "Don't quit, even if you cry." The paper had yellowed slightly, but the words still felt fresh, a promise from my younger self that I had kept. As I lifted the box, I turned to Dad. "Here," I said, handing him an envelope. "You might want to see this." He frowned but took it. Inside were 3 printed invoices, my last 3 months of income. Each page showed the same line at the bottom. Total, $10,000, $10,000, and $12,500. For a moment, he didn't move. His eyes scanned the numbers, his brows rising and then pulling together like he was trying to make the math fit into the version of me he had built in his head. Mom's voice broke the silence first. "Lisa, why didn't you tell us?" I took a slow breath. "Because when I did small things right, you laughed," I said. "And when I did big things right, you didn't ask." No one spoke. Even Daniel's smirk was gone. Sarah looked down, her fingers tightening around her mug. The only sound was the wind brushing through the brittle leaves on the porch. Dad cleared his throat, but his voice wasn't firm this time. "We're sorry about last night. That was not kind." Mom nodded quickly, her tone softer now. "Please come in. We'll fix you a plate. There's still pie left." For a moment, I almost said yes. I could smell the coffee from inside, the familiar warmth of the house, the comfort of old walls that had once felt like home. I even put my hand on the doorknob, the same one that had always been a little loose, no matter how many times Dad tried to fix it. But then I remembered standing in that same kitchen the night before, holding an empty plate while they laughed. I remembered the long nights alone in my Denver home, working until dawn, trying to build something from nothing. I remembered teaching myself to clap for myself, because no one else did. "I can't," I said finally. "Not today." Mom's face fell. "Lisa, don't be stubborn. We made a mistake." "I know," I said quietly. But it wasn't just one mistake. I stepped back from the door and walked toward the car. Dad followed me halfway down the porch steps, his voice uncertain. "You're really making that kind of money? All by yourself?" I looked at him. "Yes, all by myself." There was a long silence before he nodded slowly, like he was still trying to understand. "Well," he said finally, "I'm proud of you." The words came too late. They landed softly, but carried no weight. I didn't need pride from people who had laughed at my hunger. I loaded the box into the trunk and closed it gently. Mom and Dad stood together on the porch now, their faces drawn in regret. Daniel lingered in the doorway, looking awkward, while Sarah touched his arm and whispered something I couldn't hear. "Take care of yourself," Mom said, her voice trembling slightly. "I've been doing that for years," I said. Then I got into my car and started the engine. The sound filled the quiet air. As I backed out of the driveway, I glanced once more at the house, the same white paint, the same flickering porch light. For a brief moment, I saw my father's hand reach for Mom's shoulder, as if to steady her. Their faces looked smaller, softer, and maybe even sorry. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. The road stretched ahead, clear and open. The sun glowed faintly in the winter sky, and as I drove away, I felt something heavy lift off my chest. It wasn't revenge or satisfaction, it was freedom. For years, I had carried the weight of their disbelief, their judgment, their small jokes disguised as love. Now, I left it all behind on that driveway. By the time I reached the highway, the house was just a memory in my mirror, a small, shrinking, swallowed by distance. I rolled down the window, letting the cold wind brush against my face. It felt like a reset, a clean breath. I thought about the letter in the box, the one that said, "Don't quit, even if you cry." I smiled to myself. I hadn't quit. I had cried plenty, yes, but I had kept going, through doubt, through loneliness, through laughter that cut deep. And now, finally, I had become the woman that a younger version of me believed I could be. As I crossed back into open country, I whispered into the wind, "You were right." The mountains were still days away, but for the first time, I didn't feel the miles. I felt light, strong, steady, and finally seen, even if only by myself. When I returned to Denver, winter had already wrapped the city in white. The streets were soft with snow, and the houses along my block glowed with warm yellow light. My small blue house stood quiet but welcoming, the porch light steady against the cold. Inside, it smelled of cinnamon and pine. I had bought a little evergreen for the living room, not tall or fancy, but full and alive, and strung it with white lights that flickered gently in the evenings. It was my first Christmas alone, and for once, I didn't feel lonely. A few weeks after Thanksgiving, I decided to invite a few friends over. Sarah, from my gym, came first with a tray of lasagna. Nina, a writer I'd met at a coffee shop downtown, brought a bottle of wine, and Lucas, my neighbor who once fixed my porch light, arrived with a pie he'd made himself, slightly burnt, but good-hearted. We ate at my wooden table, the one I bought secondhand, and refinished myself. The laughter that night was easy, soft, without the sharp edges of judgment I had grown used to. At one point, Nina asked about my family. I told them the story. The Thanksgiving dinner, the empty plate, the cruel laughter, and the stunned faces when they saw my car. The room fell quiet for a moment, and then Sarah shook her head. "Some people don't deserve to know your success," she said. Lucas nodded. "You built something they couldn't understand," he added. I smiled and shrugged. "Maybe," I said, "but I'm done waiting for them to understand." After they left, I washed the dishes slowly, and the house was peaceful again. Outside, the snow was falling in thin silver lines, coating the porch rail. I looked around the room, the tree, the table, the soft lamplight, and realized I finally felt at home. Not because of where I was, but because of who I had become. Work stayed steady through the winter. I helped a bookstore in Portland redesign its online shop for $3,000, wrote an ad course for a Boston firm for £1,200, and designed a site for a Dallas florist who paid me in advance without a single question. Each project felt smoother, easier, more mine. I had learned to say no when something didn't feel right, to charge what I was worth, to walk away from people who treated freelancers like servants. Every month, I set aside money for taxes, for savings, and for small luxuries. Not flashy things, just comforts that reminded me I had earned rest. A new chair for my office. A soft blanket. A better coffee maker. These weren't gifts from anyone else. They were quiet trophies of independence. On weekends, I drove to the mountains. Sometimes alone, sometimes with Sarah or Nina. We'd find a trail, hike until the air grew thin, and sit on the rocks looking over the white peaks. Those drives cleared my head. The world felt wide and open again, not small like it had at that Thanksgiving table. Just before Christmas, a letter arrived in the mail. It was from my parents. The envelope was neat, the handwriting careful, my mother's. Inside was a single page that said, "We're proud of you. We're sorry." I read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in the drawer beside my desk. I didn't cry and I didn't call. Some apologies come too late to heal the wound they caused. Forgiveness, I realized, is like a door. You can open it or you can keep it closed. I wasn't ready to open it yet. Maybe someday, maybe never. For now, peace didn't require their approval. It came from the quiet mornings when I made coffee, turned on my laptop, and watched my name appear on invoices that meant something real. Sometimes, when I drove home at night, I passed families gathered in windows, their laughter spilling out onto the snow. A part of me still ached for that kind of warmth, but I knew now that family wasn't just blood. It was the people who sat at your table without asking for proof of your worth. It was the friends who showed up with pie and laughter, not judgment. One evening, as I sat by the window watching the snow fall over my porch, I whispered a small prayer. Not to anyone in particular, but to the universe, or maybe to the woman I had fought to become. "Thank you," I said, "for the work, for the quiet, for the strength." Because in the end, that was what mattered. I had built a life with my own hands, in my own house, with my own money. I had learned to trust my voice, to stand on my own, to feed myself and the people I loved, and as I looked around that little blue house, warm, full of light, steady against the winter, I knew this was enough.